We were lucky in that Jeff Bezos had run across us as part of some like Amazon like due diligence thing and like looking at the market and thought we were an interesting company and just called Reed and said I'd be interested in investing. And this was at the beginning of 2008. And we were like, okay, yes, Jeff Bezos, you can invest. We sort of like we didn't need the money at that point. But we extended our round at a higher valuation and took about $3 million from Jeff Bezos, which was really important because that was what like got us through the financial crash.
Welcome to the Gaming Founders Podcast, a show where we interview the founders that have shaped the gaming industry. I'm Eden Chen, the CEO of Pragma, a back-end game engine founded by engineering leaders that built the platforms for some of the largest live service games, like League of Legends, Fortnite, Destiny 2, and Plants vs. Zombies 2. Pragma powers services like accounts, matchmaking, and player data for the world's most ambitious live service games.
And I'm Kevin Zhang, partner at Upfront Ventures. We're a venture capital firm based in LA and San Francisco. I lead game investments both in studios as well as the pick and shovel tools that power game developers and content creators to do their best work, including Pragma. We interview founders on their origin stories, the tactics that help them survive and thrive, and key lessons for anyone interested in building the next generation of leading gaming companies. Learn more and subscribe today at pragma.gg/gamingfounders. Today's episode is with Emily Greer, co-founder and CEO of Double Loop Games, building meaningful and charming experiences for anyone that likes to play games, regardless of whether they self-identify as gamers. Previously, Emily cut her teeth over 13 years as COO, then CEO of Kongregate, a leading browser then mobile publisher behind hundreds of indie games played by tens of millions of players. She's seen it all through the platform shifts from PC to Facebook to mobile, raised capital from Jeff Bezos and Reid Hoffman at a time when Silicon Valley VCs had little interest in games, and in a rare feat, exited her company not once, but twice to GameStop, then Modern Times Group, all to start again with her new startup, Double Loop, through the challenging pandemic years. On to our conversation with Emily. Well, welcome to the Gaming Founders Podcast, Emily. This one's long in the works. We've both known you for a while now. Super excited to hear really your long career in games across multiple companies you founded. But maybe to go all the way back to the beginning, maybe you can share a little bit about how you actually got into games and decided to start, building companies in games.
Yeah. All credit and blame lies fundamentally with my brother. So we grew up playing games together. Like our mom was like very into computers and we had like an Apple II and then like the original 1984 Mac. And we were like the house where, a bunch of boys and me clustered around a computer to play like, Ultima and like early Broderbund games, etc. And then what happened, my brother and I went to college. We stopped sharing a computer. He dropped out of university to become a games programmer and worked on Ultima 7. And I stopped playing games very much, except that I became like a classic casual gamer and had, Bejeweled on my flip phone and like played like on Pogo and various other places. So we had this sort of like split. And I got into catalogs and e-commerce. So essentially I did data science and UA before it was called either of those things. And I had to deal with COBOL databases and learned LTV prediction methods that had been handed down from like LL Bean in the 1960s, which are still actually completely relevant to what we're doing today. But after about 10 years of that, I got a little bored, and my brother wanted to leave EA and start a company, and he had the idea for Kongregate, and I would like a open platform with like community and chat and really fair terms to developers and open distribution. And I started helping him with his business plan because I knew a lot more. He was an engineer. I knew a lot more about, financials and marketing and just general things. And then, I was like, this is a good idea. This is more fun than what I'm doing. I don't know a lot about games. but I do know how to run a company, and like more than Jim did. And so I volunteered as his co-founder, and that was how I got into games. I really got into a startup more than I got into games, but then all of that like childhood, early love of games just came like rushing back when I got to do it all day. So, and, building a platform and, early Kongregate, we were getting, or not just early Kongregate, for years and years, we were getting, 1,500 new games uploaded per month, 1,000, 1,500 games.
Wow.
And had millions of players. And for somebody who's like a data person, there is no better way to learn about games than this. Just every genre, all the data, everything that I could want to look at was just this marvelous, unrecreatable introduction into the game industry itself.
That's wonderful. I remember playing Kongregate games at my high school computer lab, but now obviously the landscape's quite different on the distribution side. Maybe you can just lay the groundwork a little bit for readers, at the time when you started this and, kind of the scale of what does it mean to have thousands of games being uploaded? Like where else would people even go to find games to play at the time?
So in 2006, the main part of the game industry was completely dominated by packaged goods, retail distribution, getting your box into GameStop and, Walmart, et cetera. And for an independent developer, that was the only avenue. Was you get a deal from a publisher like Activision or Broderbund or, whoever. And the terms were pretty awful because they were, the only way you could get there. So they would fund you, but they would own all IP. You got a tiny percentage of the rev share and, not much freedom. And that was actually a really important part of why we started Kongregate. Jim, my brother, had a studio, had founded a studio previously in the late 90s in Austin. They actually had a successful game. It was critically successful game, published by Activision, called Netstorm Islands at War. And they got what was the equivalent, would now be the equivalent of like an 85, 90 Metacritic score in terms of reviews, and sold less than 10,000 copies because Activision decided to promote Command and Conquer instead and didn't do the marketing they promised. So the CNET later named it the number one game of all time that nobody bought, based on the combination of like height of the critic scores and like total like nothing in terms of the sales. And the studio ended up going under because they wanted to make a sequel. Activision didn't want to make the sequel, but also didn't want to release the rights for them to take it someplace else. And they didn't want to start from scratch, and they just ended up folding. And that was very much the landscape. There was a separate landscape that had been burbling, which was in the casual space, as the internet took hold and became broad, where the 1999 try and buy. So there were these portals like Big Fish and, Yahoo Games, et cetera, where you could buy puzzle games and hidden object games. And there was this great sort of flowering for people, particularly PopCap was one of the winners, but there were a bunch of other where you could, there was this sort of direct sale to players that wasn't getting routed through retail stores and all of that hassle. And you could make smaller games and you could make different kinds of games. And then just burbling was kind of was flash games and browser games right when we started. So mid 2000s, that technology had really broken through. So previous to that, it just took a lot of tech and a lot of know-how to make a game at all. And then, Adobe with Flash really put tools in the hands of sort of everybody in the world. And you didn't need to go to college and study programming. You didn't need to live near an existing game center to get into games. If you were a random teenager in Argentina or Indonesia or, Duluth, Minnesota, and you were really determined, you could figure out how to make a game with the help of the internet and forums and then release it. So those were people making games for love, and they had no idea of how to to make money on them or have any expectation of them. And there was this like viral growth of Flash games because you could see a website that had a game on it and look at the HTML and grab the SWF. And then any random person could put up a website and steal those SWF files and put it up. And so suddenly there was like 1,000 anonymous Flash gaming sites that were sort of all identical, that were all stealing games that people had put up. People were learning from that and copying from that. And it turned into this like great flowery ecosystem of creativity that harnessed kind of, it's the real first indie ecosystem and the first one that really democratized game development to kind of the entire world. So, Flash games, previously like game development was very much concentrated in like the strongholds of, US, Canada, Japan, China, Korea, and UK. And this was, really anybody anywhere in the world could have a hit. And that's the ecosystem that Kongregate came into. But people were having hits where they weren't making money. And so my brother, from his experience of really painful experience of building a failed studio, wanted to bridge these worlds that he was seeing of, more professional game development and more like sort of indie, totally amateur game development, and allow them to sort of fuse into a better, more healthier ecosystem where people could really make money on their games and retain the IP rights. Because that was something on both ends, whether you were making a game published by a big publisher or whether you were having your Flash game stolen off of Newgrounds, you weren't making any money and you didn't control the future of your game. And he was seeing the possibilities of changing that. And yeah, I'd say I came along for the ride, but obviously like I was a really important part of building it, but it was completely, his initial vision from having been a game developer and then seeing what was happening on the web that really drove Kongregate.
And sounds like you guys kind of swap roles over time and you became CEO. Maybe you can share a little bit about how that kind of decision came about.
Part of that story is just like, is a lot about, siblings and sibling dynamics and, what we're interested in. We grew up moving a lot and like living in a bunch of foreign countries. And I've heard from other people who've had that experience that like your families become really close, in particular siblings become really close because you're just like the friend that moves around with you. So we've always been especially close and with a particular dynamic where he gets me to do things that I wouldn't otherwise do. Like he's sort of always pushing the boundaries and I stop him from doing really stupid shit.
Good partnership.
And we both listen to each other and, our lives are better as a result. So when we started, that was, even you hearing me describe how I became co-founder was kind of that dynamic. And he was, he had a great, strong engineering background and I had more like, product and marketing. And so in the early days of the company, that engineering side and that knowledge of games and games development was, really important and what was sort of driving the company. But as we got bigger and over time, several things happened. One is I learned a lot about games and became, kind of equivalently as knowledgeable about games. And then running the company became much more about running the company, right? And all of the, management and dealing with parent companies and also in particular, free to play. Like free to play is very much a data-driven kind of optimization game. And that is very much played both to my strengths as a background and my sort of interests and tastes as a person. Jim loves building platforms. And he'd also spent, had a whole career building games before Kongregate. So he was really excited by the platform part. And as the platform was mature and we were part of a parent company and it was more free to play, et cetera, it just wasn't as interesting to him anymore. And it was very much that first 2 years, it was, it was like 75% him, 25% me. After that, it was like 50-50 for a while. And then it was like 75% me, 25% him. And it was like, we got to a point where it's like, yeah, he's just not as, we had exited to GameStop. He wasn't as passionate about it anymore. And it was time for him he wanted to move on and be excited about things.
Just moving back a tiny bit, how long did it take for you all to build the initial platform? And then what was the sort of marketing strategy I'm sure there were lots of people trying to build platforms. And again, this was a, burgeoning space. How did you all kind of come up ahead of all that?
I don't know actually that there were that many people building anything that similar to what we were looking at. There were people who were building really simple Flash game websites, and there were people who were building like communication platforms. But what we were building, actually, I don't think other people were. One thing is Jim had been the director of engineering at Pogo.com for the 3 years prior to that, which is a casual site owned by EA that had a really sort of interesting and deep community that revolved around chat and achievements around like bingo and solitaire and other casual games. And he, Jim would say is that, he looked at that and he was like, I love this structure of this as a platform, but I don't love the games. And so one of the things that sped us up was in a lot of ways, we were copying a bunch of Pogo things and then just making it for browser. I think we started engineering in July of 2007, and we had opened up our closed alpha in October. So it was about, 3-4 months. Yeah. And it was really like basic, and it wasn't something we were going to open up broadly. But what we had sort of, there's a chicken and the egg between, on a platform always, between audience and content, right? Or, not always audience and content, but usually there's two sides that are providing things and like which comes first. And we had decided that the games come first and that we were going to concentrate on attracting developers based on this revolutionary concept that they could control their games and get a share of the ad revenue. But, there wasn't any ad revenue, right? We didn't have any traffic. So what we did was weekly and monthly contests based on game ratings. So we were letting in small numbers of people, mostly game developers to begin with. And whatever game had the like top 3 games of the week got like prizes of like 250 and 150. And like top of the month was like, $1,000 or something. But it meant that, as soon as a good game was uploaded, we were able to like send them money, right? And then send them money again. And it built this trust. So we were mostly at that point getting people's like back catalog of games, but it meant that they were building like attachment. And so as soon as they released a new game, they would put it on Kongregate first because they were going to get money there. And then we also did a lot to focus on SEO and having really good SEO, like search engine links. We did PR. So we started getting like some inbound links from proper, like Fox News did a piece on us and various other things that like meant that our search ranking was really high. So when we went public, by the time we went public in March of 2007 and opened up it to anybody, we had, 1,000 games. And if you search for those games, we were, one of the top 3 results. So we got this combination. From there, we would get on Dig, this was before Reddit was big.
Oh yeah, of course. Yep. Yeah.
And different inbound links. And we just kept, the way I describe our growth is not exactly viral. It was like viral in spikes around particular games, but I always called it like Katamari growth, where it's about retention. We were retaining players at a really high level and we were retaining developers at a really high level. And so we just kept kind of rolling up, and every month that the ball was bigger. And yeah, there were viral spikes in and out, but that was game driven. So some of that was like good intentions and like I think the focus on developers, focus on getting the content, thinking of them as influencers, that was really important. We were thinking about SEO, but there's all sorts of things that we kind of got lucky on, and sort of right place, right time.
Timing is critical.
Yeah.
When in that journey did you raise capital, or were you guys bootstrapping?
Yes, is the answer. So we bootstrapped. I had gotten some options from a previous company, like that previous, like 5 months before starting Kongregate. Jim got a settlement from the EA spouse lawsuit around overtime. So we both had just gotten this like kind of flush of extra cash, plus some money our grandmother left us. And then our dad matched whatever the money that we were putting in, our dad matched. So we used that to get the prototype going. And in the period that we were building the prototype, we were, going through Silicon Valley and pitching VCs. And it was a pretty good pitch at that time because YouTube had just sold for $1 billion and people wanted to do games, but were afraid of them. So like a games platform was a pretty good pitch. But then, we were having lots of conversations, and then we did our open alpha. TechCrunch wrote it up. And within the week, we had 4 or 5 term sheets. And it was one of these things where it was like slow, fast. We ended up deciding to go with a angel round led by Reid Hoffman. So that was sort of I think 1.2 million, something like that, including the money that Jim and I and my dad had put in, converted in that round. So we got preferred stock in that, and then we signed the and came to agreement in November. But Reid, being an extremely busy and important man, failed to do any of the paperwork. So I don't think we actually signed everything and got the paperwork, especially because it involved Reid dividing up which of his friends got to put in money as well. So I don't think that got signed until February, but Reid felt badly, and we were starting to run short of cash on that. But so Reid felt bad, and we hadn't signed any paperwork, and he just sent us a check early.
Reid
signed. So we had his money, but not that. Yeah. So that was probably February. And then, in March, we did our public announcement, and we very, very quickly had, I think after we had gone open beta, within a month or two, we had 1 million monthly uniques. So it was clear, we were, and the games were hockey sticking, the traffic was hockey sticking, and we didn't need the money. But Reid was like, this is a good moment. You're going to, good time for you to raise. And said, I'm going to set it up with some artificial scarcity and tell 5 firms they have the opportunity to give you a term sheet. So that time it was just really, really quick and condensed, 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, where we pitched, 5 firms and got offers from all of them, and then decided to go with Greylock. And that was our Series A. So that's one of these things that will it was really unreal at the time, and is just kind of this rare thing coming together. But also it was part of we probably could have gotten a better deal on our seed round from one of the firms rather than going with Reid, but we more than made up for it on our A, because he could he gave us such great guidance and so much prestige plus our numbers, and it was boom.
Was he working at Greylock then?
He was not yet working. He's still running LinkedIn then.
Oh, okay. That's what I said. I forgot. We share investors. I guess because Greylock did our A.
Greylock led your A.
Yeah. That's funny. I forgot that they did.
They reference checked. Yeah, they reference checked you with me.
Oh, thank you for saying. Hopefully, clearly it was nice things because it ended up well.
Yeah.
That's great.
So you foreshadowed then to the GameStop, so being acquired by GameStop. When did that come about? Kind of love to hear a bit about the decision behind why sell at that moment, and if there were any other parties that you were particularly interested in working with.
I just told the story of our amazing hotness, and then the next story is about that gradually, building a more substantial company, and yet the hotness kind of gradually, draining away as you're, like you continue.
It's the entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah.
An entrepreneurial journey. So yeah, Kongregate continued to do well, especially in terms of traffic. Revenue wise, not as much. We did have like a steady amount on advertising, but we had believed that free to play was going to be the, future of the games industry, which, in 2006 was not at all, that was a minority opinion, right? Like it just really was not here at all. So we built out like a platform to do free to play on Kongregate, and had, this site-wide currency called creds. And, we were, dealing with all of the payments, and then you would buy within games, but there weren't any games to take advantage of it. So we funded some games, all from like good developers who went on, or most of them from good developers who went on to success, but we didn't know what we were doing. They didn't know what they were doing. All the monetization was like focused on like cosmetics and like, synchronous multiplayer that they weren't equipped to actually build. And so those games.
If only they had Pragma back then. I'm kidding.
If only they had Pragma. Yeah, they were using like we were working with Electro Server to be like the back end for those games.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And that was like a slow, painful thing. So we launched that at the beginning of 2008. And got essentially, we were making like $1,000 a month on in-app purchases for, I think it was at the end of November 2008. And then for an entire year, it was like $1,000 a month or less, and just totally insignificant. We were making a decent amount from advertising, but it was, not quite break even. And, very dependent on getting, a big deal from Toyota or Left 4 Dead doing a big campaign. And it was, and advertisers take forever to pay. So it'd be like, we've got $300K in receivables from, Microsoft, but it might take us 9 months to get it because it's going through the agency.
Oh, wow.
So,
okay.
So it was one of these things where we were doing but our traffic kept growing. So we were, I think by that point, we were 10 million monthly uniques. Like we had a lot of traffic.
Expensive upkeep.
Yeah. Expensive upkeep. We were paying out quite a bit of it to developers. And then the financial crash happened. We were lucky in that Jeff Bezos had run across us as part of some like Amazon like due diligence thing, and like looking at the market, and thought we were an interesting company, and just called Reed and said I'd be interested in investing. And this was at the beginning of 2008. And we were like, okay, yes, Jeff Bezos, you can invest. We sort of we didn't need the money at that point, but we extended our round at a higher valuation and took about $3 million from Jeff Bezos, which was really important because that was what like got us through the financial crash. So that was March 2008. World melts down, July 2008. We're in like this kind of gradual growth mode. And by end of 2009, my brother is trying to like raise a B because things are we're okay, but we're like losing a little bit every month or break even. It was really tight. And, we could see mobile coming, like the iPhone had come out, and we were like, we should figure out how to do mobile. And so he tried to raise a B, and it was just not happening, right? Like people could look at us and say, oh, you've been growing like this, but we want you to grow like this. We don't think, it doesn't look like free to play is happening. And so we got pass. But, and here's the magic of open platforms. Somebody had made a like indie browser MMO, and they uploaded it to Kongregate. And we suddenly started making money on IAP. And it was one of these things. It was like 1,000. Then the next month it was like 9,000. And then it was like 27,000. It was like, oh, this is the kind of game that makes money. let's go out and find more games like this and recruit them. So then it was also the moment when like Chinese browser games really started to think about coming to the West. So we went out and then Facebook platform was taking off. So we went out and started recruiting both Facebook games and Chinese browser games to the platform. And then that really started taking off. And we were at break even and we were really growing again, but still like Silicon Valley was not interested. And GameStop came calling and they were looking for somebody to, help them figure out digital. And we had the conversation, especially as we were trying to raise money. It's like, if we raise money, even if we succeed, it's going to be this higher valuation. Are we going to be able to exit at that? So we were sort of indifferent about being acquired. And what happened was that, GameStop decided they were really interested in us and kept pursuing, and they kept offering us deals and we kept saying no. And then we had talked about some number at which point we would consider it, sort of like what for us was like the break even between like selling and raising the next round and taking that risk. And we thought, this has been going on for like 6 months, 9 months. And we thought the deal with GameStop was dead. I'd been pushing off like a vacation. I hadn't taken a vacation in 2 years. I go to Italy. I land in Italy. GameStop has just come through with the offer that was exactly the number that was like our break-even point, like of we would consider it. And so I spent my like 2 weeks of vacation, like doing, 10 p.m. calls with GameStop and our investment banker. And at that point, we did go out and do more of a process and we talked to some other people. I think we didn't get any other letters of intent, but we got a verbal offer from Google that was slightly higher than GameStop, but would have been for us to become the achievements and platform team for Android. And they would have wanted to shut Kongregate down. And we weren't interested in that. We wanted to keep building Kongregate. And one thing that was specifically interesting to us about GameStop was actually the fact that they were a retailer and didn't understand what we were doing as well. Jim likes to say that he's quit EA twice without ever being hired because he was at Origin when EA bought Origin and at Pogo when EA bought Pogo. And he had a real fear of getting bought by, EA or Microsoft or one of these and just being part of like rolling reorg after rolling reorg and, thought that we didn't fit into any other org. And they were sort of committed to, continuing on the brand and like letting us operate and build the business. And that turned out to be true. So we never made a decision to accept GameStop. We just kept not saying no. And then you get to this moment, like we always thought that the deal was going to fall apart, like something was going to come up. And then we got to this moment where we're in the lawyer's offices, and it's like, okay, I guess we're never actually saying no. I guess it's now a yes. So I don't think I ever really said yes until like I signed my name to the paperwork. And it's one of these things like I have really mixed feelings about it because we did, it was one of these things where it was a good but not 10x outcome for all of our, for our seed round, it was 10x. For our, later rounds, it was, a good multiple. Into the family between me, my dad and my brother, it was that kind of life-changing money that gives you long-term security. And it ended up being a pretty good home for Kongregate. And we continued to grow and build the business. And I worked there for another 7 years. But the IIP business was just taking off then. And I think, given another 6 months, another 12 months, we would have been able to raise. And we, after GameStop bought us, we doubled pretty much every year that, for 7 years. So, and maybe we could have sold for more. Maybe there's things that could have happened. Like, I don't think it was a bad outcome at all. I don't regret it, but I also think that there's, big opportunities that we didn't necessarily tackle because we were part of GameStop. In particular, one of my biggest regrets is that we'd always meant to do paid downloadables, right? And this was when Steam was still relatively young, and it was hard to get on the platform. And when GameStop bought us, that was part of our plan, was that we wanted to do it. But then they bought Impulse, and they didn't want to fund us doing that versus mobile because they already had, people working on, and they didn't want our divisions competing. And, we wanted to do mobile. We didn't fight that hard. We wanted to do mobile. And we did have a lot of concerns about, security of open uploads and how is all of our free traffic going to, transfer to premium games. But I also look at that and think, my God, we were in a really, really privileged position to compete in the PC market and Steam as of 2009, 2010, before they opened up. And they have such a dominant monopoly position. We might well have failed, but we had an opportunity that we didn't take advantage of, in part because we sold to GameStop. And that is one of the biggest what ifs I have.
I'm curious if any of your investors have particularly strong input on whether to sell or not, or it was mostly just up to you guys?
It was up to us. So we were in the fund that had LinkedIn and Facebook. It was clear, we were not going to make a difference to the outcome either way, right? This fund was going to be the
legendary.
best fund in the history of funds, regardless of what we did. And, they were supportive, and they were supportive of us going with GameStop over that higher offer. Because ultimately for them, it would have been a few $1 million, again, in a fund where it would not make a difference. And this was, was going to be what we wanted, better outcome for our, better situation for our employees. And particularly, part of it for us was, the developers. We had large numbers of developers who were making their living off of Kongregate, and we definitely felt a responsibility not to just shut that down out of nowhere because, Google offered us a little bit more.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like Reid Hoffman, Jeff Bezos, I mean, you guys are probably one of the few companies that have two billionaires angel invest, or whatever you call it, angel investing, I guess. Yeah. I don't know if it's an angel at that point, but.
Yeah. So it was officially, it was the Bezos's private fund.
I didn't even know he did that stuff, but and then Greylock having, obviously the great reputation they do. And then the amount of MAUs you guys were driving, it seems like the raise would have been something that you could have done. But I mean, 2008 was crazy.
It was a very different market.
Yeah. 2008 was crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, it was the 2009, 2010. Oh, the other thing to remember is this is during the heyday of Facebook, right? So all of the energy and all of the money was going towards, social gaming startups, right? And we weren't that. I would argue we were something better because we were our own platform, but we were not the flavor of the month.
Right.
And we
were
were
not
more
spamming users
company.
to buy every other second.
Yeah. I mean, but I do think if we'd another 6 months, another 9 months, we could have raised. Both the environment got better, our free to play story became a real story, and we could have done it. And maybe it would not be Steam, and it would not be kind of Steam with Epic and Itch. It would be a more dual system. Probably not. They did have, some pretty good games. That Valve company. That would have mattered. But I just, that is my single biggest regret. And that's including the fact that I said no to Minecraft. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. When Notch was in early development of Minecraft, he was thinking about distribution, and he approached us about having a free version on Kongregate, but it was going to be he didn't want to use our currency and payments. He just wanted to do it as a CPA deal. And we would have had to do a bunch of engineering to support it because it was a Java applet, et cetera. And, we had this whole discussion, and I have an email that is me saying the final, no, I don't think this is worth it. And I don't think that it would have been company changing just because it was the free version CPA. I feel like solid on the reasons that I said no. And I will say it was also like an early version. So it was like before there were creeps, there was it was just like the sandbox thing. And we thought it was really cool. And we had a very intense discussion of whether this was worth, breaking all of our like platform rules over. And yeah, I said the final no. And so for years at Kongregate, as part of the employee orientation, I had a deck that I took people through, and I had a copy of that, like a screenshot of that email in there to be like, you can never make a bigger screw up than me. So don't be and we're still a successful company. Don't be afraid of like failure and judgment, just go for it. So I said no to Minecraft, and it's not even my biggest regret.
I remember those early Notch days. He was seemingly invincible, like just like Superman. It was really impressive. You stayed at GameStop for 7 years, which is, I guess, longer than most or many people do after, whatever the standard 4 years. What kind of made you stick around a little longer?
Yeah, our earnouts ran for 3 years. So I stayed 4 years past my earnouts. So that's substantial. I mean, GameStop was paying me quite well, so it was not
volunteer work.
It was not volunteer work, to be clear. But a big part of it was there were two things. So one is that we had gone in and pitched. We had done our initial like mobile strategy that didn't work, and then gone in. And then I really wanted to push to do publishing because I thought that that relationship with the developer, that need was there. It just wasn't like we just couldn't be a platform on mobile because Apple and Google weren't going to allow it. So, but we could have that like relationship. And we pitched GameStop on doing it, and they committed to it. And my earnout finished right around the time we were launching that. And I really wanted to see that through. Like I'd made that commitment, built the team, et cetera. And then it did really well. So part of it was that desire to build the business. Another part of it was like I was building a new business. Like that publishing business was kind of a brand new business on top of Kongregate. So I had that sort of like that interest in the learning and the building as part of it. And overall in that period in GameStop, we did get reorged, but we'd gotten reorged under a boss I really liked, who really trusted us and was just like, tell me what you need. I'll explain the corporate politics and get you it. And then otherwise, here's the parameters you can work in, and then just go do your thing. So it really, really still felt like my company. And yeah, I was part of GameStop, but it felt like my company, and I felt that control. What ended up happening was that, there's like kind of a sweet spot in terms of being in part of a big company where you're like doing well enough that they are not trying to fix the problem, but you're not so big that you really matter to the quarterly results. And we were in that sweet spot for a long time because like GameStop loved being able to say Kongregate's grown 100%, 200% year on year. But, within a $10 billion company, it wasn't mattering. But if we doubled enough and they started shrinking enough that those things eventually collided. And that's when it stopped feeling, one, I was really worried about what was going to happen, started to really worry about what was going to happen to GameStop and what would happen to Kongregate within that. They didn't really understand UA and payback. And so things would happen like, at this point, nobody at GameStop is like that I knew is there. So I'm going to be a little indiscreet, but they, they had a really bad quarter, the same quarter that we launched like 3 hit games, and asked us to turn off all of our UA spend for the final 2 months of the year so that they could make their numbers. And there was nothing I could do. And it really hurt those games that launched that year really badly. And it was sort of like, okay, it's time to leave. It's time to get Kongregate out. And we got Kongregate bought out by MTG, which is, good home for it. But then by then I was like, okay, I'm now in my second public company.
Yeah.
And I really I think Kongregate at that point got to be, it was like about 120 people. And, I really missed building things. I really missed the smaller team. I really missed that smaller, earlier stage, and just decided that I wasn't going to start. I didn't want to go work for another company. I just didn't feel like I would care about it as much as something I started myself. So it wasn't until I had an idea of something that I really wanted to do and something that I really wanted to build that I was ready to leave Kongregate. So that's part of what happened.
And maybe before we jump into obviously the last few years in Double Loop, just one more question. I mean, did you, going into that second exit, with MTG, did you try to do anything differently during that sales process or structuring kind of the deal in a way, that it might end up slightly differently at MTG, or what was that process like?
It was a really,
or maybe you had no control because GameStop wanted to sell. So
yeah, I had some control, but it was like a three-party negotiation because it had to be something that GameStop wanted to do. And they initially didn't want to sell us. So that really affected the process, is they wanted to spin us out and get a 40% owner and a bunch of new capital in and separate that out. And that was a really, really complicated deal to try and get done. And what ended up happening is that, MTG was interested in that deal, and we were going down the path of that deal. And then we were in the legal part of that deal. And everybody was like, oh, actually, it would be way simpler just to do a sale. So that whole process was I think we very likely would have ended up in a different home if it had started with GameStop is looking to sell Kongregate, right? So it was a strange process, and it made sense for various reasons, but yeah, it was a strange process. We did have multiple options, and I steered and I was steering towards MTG, and it was very important to, the acquiring companies that, me and some other key talent were going to sign contracts. So there, it was this like very funky three-party negotiation. But yeah, getting one company out of getting out of a large company has almost no parallels. I don't think I learned anything useful that would be applicable towards future acquisitions or repeatable. It was like it was a one of one kind of situation.
The next topic is extremely interesting to me because Chris and I set out to start a game studio at one point, and we ended up working on a platform, and you started, with a platform, and now you're working on a game studio.
What? Yeah. My brother took your path, right?
Yeah. I guess what are the so far? I mean, there's so much to talk about here, and we have not a ton of time. But what are the differences and similarities between these two types of companies? Like, you don't come from making games, and now you're making games.
Yeah. It's hard to say how much is like the kind of company and how much is like 15 plus years of change in the game industry, 15 plus years of change in venture capital and like the general environment, and 15 plus years of change in me. Like, I came in as like, oh, cool, startup world, right? Like without much confidence or kind of knowing what I wanted or how to navigate these things. And doing a second startup where you're an experienced founder is a very different experience. Like, there's all sorts of stuff, random stuff that I do differently just because I know, in an acquisition, like around like our accounting and like keeping track of all of our contracts, it's like, if I'm careful about this now, it'll save me like multiple days of pain later. But, I think the building a team and working in a small team that's like 20 people or less and figuring out strategy is actually more similar than you would think. Like, the whole Kongregate experience of like launching and then having like rocket success within 9 months is not what's happening, and couldn't even happen just because it takes longer than that to make games now, right? But how do you build a team? How do you gel a team? How do you figure out strategy? How do you adjust strategy to what the environment is? Like, that's kind of the same, and it feels the same. And, I really like working with like a small team in a focused way. And that was one of the things that I really missed when, Kongregate had been so successful and grown for 15 years and had so many different parts of businesses. Like, I love the focus and I love being like tangible and hands-on on product and thinking about the player and getting to make those decisions. And I love getting to learn something again, right? Like I had been in games a long time. I did not know anything about art pipelines, right? Like never, and now I do, right? And that's fun.
I guess I have questions around the mobile industry, because obviously there's lots of platforms you could be building on. At least from everything I've gathered, mobile is a focus of yours. There's obviously a host of concerns in mobile today, including, discovery, saturation, ATT, targeting. What are your views of the industry as a whole and how obviously you have a belief about the space in some way. Like, what are your thoughts about the space?
Ultimately, this is the most powerful and flexible gaming device that has ever existed. It is more than 50% of the revenue. It's way more than that of audience. It's as countries that are, not yet sort of gaming hubs come online, it's come there. And I really don't see what will replace that. Is it a mature market where it's like harder to navigate and build than it was? Absolutely. But, it's not like console and PC aren't saturated either. To some degree, they just take longer to figure out you failed, right? Like,
yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Gaming is amazing. It has taken over entertainment space. It is mature. People have grown up with games. People have spent decades with games. And the fundamental truth is that if you launch a game on any platform now, you are competing not with just what's launching, you're competing with every game that's been made before and every emotional attachment people have had. And you have to dislodge, fundamentally, to get a large audience, you have to dislodge people from other games to have a success. That is a high bar. But if you reach that bar, the level of success is still really large. And I have faith in the sort of ability of game developers to continue to build new things that are interesting, build things that matter to people, and figure out marketing. ATT is a hurdle, but one is Apple does realize that they made some mistakes and are trying to rectify it. People are adjusting, people are learning how to do it. And when the players are out there and the money is out there, we will figure it out. And I think a lot has been blamed on ATT, that the credit should go more to COVID growth, COVID hangover, and that displacement, that, you need to displace people off of games that are really well live serviced well and built to be services. And those are the bigger long-term challenges than the sort of the immediate marketing ones. Those can be, it makes it hard, it makes it less profitable, but the opportunity is still there and it's the biggest market. The other part of it for me is this is my market, right? I don't play console games. I have a inner ear problem that makes me really sensitive to camera motion. So if I play console games for more than 30 minutes, 40 minutes, I really do want to puke. So that's probably not a great idea for me to build a business in something that literally makes me want to vomit. Even if I love it, it makes me want to vomit.
Nothing is worth that.
And the other part of it is that, I deeply believe that while I am analytical, I am data driven, that the best games are made not from that place. They're made from a creative place. They're made from a place of understanding emotion and motivations and connection to the player. And I am a mobile player. I play mobile games every day, all the time. I would do that whether I was building a studio or not. And I am going to make better games for this audience, whatever the challenges are of the market. I have a better chance of success and I have a better chance of building something in this market than I do in another one. And, finally, me being a really classic mobile player, a woman, in her 40s who plays mobile games, there actually aren't that many of us in the games industry. And I think that I have an advantage in this part of the market because I am that person. I am that audience. More of our studio is that audience than typical. And that is a part of it. markets get competitive because they're great markets, right? And that is like in the end, that's what I would say about mobile.
Great. No, that's great. And obviously you bring now your experience having worked on Kongregate and your leadership. I've followed your cultural values, your leadership for a long time and from afar and just been, super impressed. So bringing, that's all unique too. And that's like not even the persona stuff that you mentioned. I guess one question that we go back to in terms of just like a cornerstone question that we ask in every episode is, and you've mentioned a lot already. So it's if you could go back to the founding of, I guess it's really your first company, and then I guess you're giving a second try now. What is like the one piece of advice you'd give other founders that are working on maybe their first gaming startup?
Don't forget to exercise. Honestly, like, that first...
You're not the first person to say that, actually.
I was thinking exercise options, but that's like such the wrong... which maybe just means I need to actually go exercise.
Yeah, the leap from being an employee to being a founder is the realization that literally everything in the end is your responsibility, right? And that you can't leave it, and that if it doesn't get done, the buck stops with you, right? And especially the first 2 years of Kongregate, that was pretty overwhelming to me. Like, I didn't know how to turn it off. And especially when we were launching and scaling and growing like a rocket, I could not shut off. I did not sleep. I slept barely enough. Like, I didn't see my friends and I didn't exercise. I didn't, I'm a amateur competitive figure skater. And I showed up at the rink after 6 months and my skates were gone because I'd been so long. I hadn't paid my locker and they'd put it in a trash bag and taken it down to the basement. And I remember being there and just crying, tears coming down my face that I had given up so much of something that I loved. And on the one hand, I felt like I needed to do that, but in retrospect, I didn't. I needed to figure out how to work hard and have a healthier balance and ability to turn that off and figure out how to say some things don't have to happen. Some of it was delegation. Some of it is just letting things go wrong when they go wrong. And yeah, I don't think I helped myself. I don't think I helped Kongregate. And even if I was working, 12, 14-hour days, if I had taken, an hour to myself every day to exercise, I think I would have been a better founder. I would have been a better leader. For me, exercise is the thing that is the sort of shortcut to perspective and shortcut to relaxation. And I really wish I'd done that. Joking about the exercise options, the other thing actually would be, is that we were pretty haphazard about how we did our early employee options. And when we went to sell and I was looking at who was getting what, I felt like there's a lot of unfairness here. And if I could get out an eraser and readjust this, I would. And we did, we had fixed it a little bit the year before we sold with some refresher grants. But part of what I did with Double Loop was be a little more conservative, be more thoughtful overall about who gets what, and then plan for a lot of refresher grants so that as you're going along, you can really make sure that it is reflecting overall contribution and not just, what mood we were in the day we made their offer.
I think at startups, people spend so much time thinking about recruiting, how you get the talent. And I mean, we have a talent team here at Upfront who helps our companies with that. But if you actually ask our team kind of where they end up spending more time, it is around retention and figuring out, are you being fair in your compensation? And it's something that you have to change every couple of years because the company grows and things change, et cetera. And it's a very complex thing to do well. And if you do it well, that really helps build your culture, actually.
Absolutely. And, back in 2006, startups were less mature in general. There wasn't information on how to do it. And we hadn't thought about HR or comp much, and it was just, that's not actually honestly something I feel I didn't agree with everything GameStop did, but I learned a lot about how to think about things and like how to have process around it from them. I wouldn't do it the way they would do it, but I also feel like I learned a lot from being part of a large organization that's really thought about, compensation across hundreds of thousands of employees.
They have the amazing retail. I'm always so blown away by the culture in the stores even. So it's an interesting company. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. I learned a lot, and I wish a lot of success on Double Loop. I'm really excited to hear more about the games. And I know you're gonna create the next Steam version of the gaming side. So excited to see what that looks like this time.
Let's call it next Supercell.
Yeah,
maybe.
there you go.
There you go. Yeah. And we got to get you back once you can shed more light on that.
That's right.
Love to hear more about that.
Be very happy to.